Freaks and Geeks is probably the best example of an amazing TV show that everyone enjoyed that was cut off at the knees before its prime. Maybe it's the 90s kid in me, maybe it's the Judd Apatow fan in me, or maybe it's the fact that Freaks and Geeks seem to capture a moment in time that all of us could relate to, regardless of when you were born or when you grew up. It's a show that took the pain of youth and turned it into something funny and understandable. Frankly, it made me just feel less alone, I guess. And with rumors of some sort of Freaks and Geeks revival circulating the internet every half decade or so, I thought now is as appropriate a time as ever to talk about the original TV show and explain why it is still so good all of these years later.
Kinda stoned.
I'm very stoned.
Freaks and Geeks was created by actor, producer, director, and writer Paul Feig. And Feig is the complete package, who began as an actor in a variety of roles in film and television, one of his most memorable roles being that of science teacher Mr. Poole on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Ironically, it was that role that would lead to the creation of Freaks and Geeks, but to fully understand that, we first need to rewind the clock back to the mid-1980s. It was the decade of arcades, cocaine, and some resultingly weird choices in television programming. However, it was also the decade that gave birth to many comedic icons. During this period, Paul Feig was a struggling stand-up comedian who would often hang out at a decrepit house in the San Fernando Valley, nicknamed The Ranch. Struggling comedians would hang out there to play poker, and as Paul would say, quote, drink coffee until the sun came up. It was here that he met a young comedian named Judd Apatow. Apatow was younger than all the other comedians at the ranch, but Feig saw Judd's potential in the industry, recognizing his talent and tenacity. Apatow also thought that Feig was hilarious and super talented. As it turns out, Feig was more than right about Judd, who would begin producing comedy specials for Roseanne Arnold and Jim Carrey. He would also become a writer and producer on the forgotten comedy gem The Larry Sanders Show, and later on would co-create yet another canceled far too soon comedy series, The Ben Stiller Show. Another memorable project that Apatow was involved in was that of producer and staff writer for another amazing comedy that we lost way too soon, The Critic. Fast forward to 1997, and Paul has just lost his role on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Feig was at a low point in his life. Acting roles were beginning to dry up, and a personal project that he'd been trying to promote was going nowhere. It was at this point that he bumped into his old pal Judd, who told him to pitch any idea that he had for TV. Feig had been thinking about his life growing up in Michigan, and how many high school shows were fake. So he decided to create one that was realistic. It would be about what life was really like for the kids who were often ridiculed and ostracized. He gave it the title of Freaks and Geeks, and sent it to Judd Apatow. Judd was shocked at how good this script was, and called Paul to tell him he was selling it to DreamWorks. That would eventually lead to it being picked up at NBC. Feig and Apatow were lucky that the president of the network at the time was Scott Sassa, who trusted the people he hired to pick up shows for the network. Feig said that he always went into meetings prepared to fight to keep the show to his vision, only to be shocked when he was told to not change a thing. Soon, Apatow and Feig began to work on getting the show off the ground. Freaks and Geeks would revolve around two siblings, Lindsay and Sam Weir, in the decade of the 1980s. Lindsay was a former academic overachiever and mathlete who has now become a rebellious teenager. In the pilot episode, we learn about the reason why Lindsay has made her decision. She and Sam have recently lost their grandmother, and while the family wasn't in the room, Lindsay watched her grandmother die. This traumatic moment made her question her views on what she believed in God and society itself. So Lindsay joins a group of outsiders dubbed the Freaks, while Sam and his friends become another group of social outcasts called the Geeks. And the experiences these two groups dealt with would be the primary focus of the show. These incidents were caused by the normal students, teachers, and other adults. It was a unique concept that wasn't often seen on television, if at all. However, to reach the show that they created to such a ravenous fan base would require a lot of work. While developing the show, Apatow would have Feig write a few more scripts. The reason for this was that Feig had written an extensive series Bible describing the characters in precise detail, including what they looked like, what they wore, and even their favorite TV shows. Apatow thought that the world needed to be explored more. Therefore, many of the details from these episodes would be incorporated into the scripts. Another thing that Judd noticed was that even though the Geeks' personalities were written very well, it was obvious to Judd that Paul didn't have as much of an understanding of the Freaks. Therefore, it became clear that an unconventional method would be needed to flesh them out, and Apatow decided to cast the roles first, then rewrite the pilot to match their personalities. Something that was unheard of at the time and rarely done today. Soon a nationwide search would begin, and many young actors would audition to land a role on this show. Apatow wanted to cast actors that looked like real kids, and avoided stunt casting at all costs, which would later annoy the network when they tried to get Britney Spears cast in a guest role. Unlike the cold and robotic nature of most casting sessions, Paul and Judd would do everything they could to keep the room energetic and relaxed. They would applaud actors' performances, make jokes with them, and try to get to know them as people. The show wouldn't have worked if the lead role of Lindsay Weir had not been perfectly cast. The wrong person in the role could have killed this series before it even started. Luckily, when Linda Cardellini walked into the casting room, Paul said that it was as if she had just stepped out of his head. Linda said that when she auditioned, she never thought that she would get the role. All she wanted to do was prove to them that she was a good actress. For the second lead of the show, Tom Weir, the leader of the Geeks, John Francis Staley would land the coveted role. John was the only actor on this show who was the same age as their character, with both him and the character being 14. John said that during the audition process, he was sick, and because of this, his mind was too preoccupied to bother being nervous during the casting process. This was his first role, and it became apparent right away that he was incredibly talented. Fun fact, the second choice to play the part of Tom was Jesse Eisenberg.
Hi, hello, Lex, it is a pleasure. Ow, wow, that is a good grip. You should not pick a fight with this person.
The group that would make up the Geeks was made of Bill Haverchuck, played by Martin Starr, and Neil Schreiber, played by Sam Levine. Like John, Martin also had a similar experience auditioning for this role. He had a busy day and kept thinking about what he needed to do after the audition, so Starr didn't have time to think about getting the role. He was so preoccupied thinking about the chores he had to get done that day that the thought of getting the role was an afterthought. Bill was the most awkward of the group, but also had a sharp and sarcastic sense of humor. His physical mannerisms were all an invention of Starr. The writers said that they mostly followed Martin's choices in portraying his character. Now, if you had to pick a word to sum up the third member of the Geeks, Neil Schreiber, it would be arrogant. Neil was overconfident and naive, so he would give Sam horrible advice and mock Bill endlessly. But he was loyal to his friends and would support Sam whenever he got bullied. I always saw Neil as an old man in a kid's body. He was constantly telling corny jokes and occasionally being a bit of a curmudgeon. In his audition tape, Levine asked the casting director if he could do a William Shatner impression.
Hello, I'm William Shatner. Tonight on Rescue 911, my toupee flies off into the face of a small girl. The girl was fine, but rescuers frantically raced to glue the toupee back to my bald skull. I'm talking like this because my girdle is killing me. Thank you.
Paul Feig said that his impression was silly and corny. Judd then looked at him and said, "That's all of us when we were in high school. Just trying to be funny, doing stupid shit." As for the Freaks, James Franco was one of the first cast. Judd Apatow discussed his initial impression of Franco as such. Quote, "We didn't think of him as handsome. We thought that his mouth was too big for his face, and he seemed perfect to be a small-town cool guy who wasn't as cool as he thought he was. When all the women in our office started talking about how gorgeous he was, me and Feig started laughing because we just didn't see it." Franco played Daniel, the leader of the Freaks, also the bad boy of the group who constantly got into trouble. Although he could be selfish, Daniel remained devoted to his friends. One of the most memorable moments of his was when he comforted his best friend Nick, after Nick realized that his dreams of becoming a drummer would not come true. James said that once he got the part, he flew out to Paul Feig's high school in Michigan and met his teachers. He walked around the school, visited the classrooms where Paul had been, and observed the kids in summer school. He focused his attention on one particular student, who he said looked rough around the edges but had a kind face, and so based his performance on that teenager. As for who would play Daniel's off-again, on-again girlfriend Kim Kelly, Busy Phillips would land the job. Busy auditioned initially to play Lindsay, but it became apparent that she wasn't the right fit. Then she got offered the role of Kim, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks. She had a dysfunctional family and a toxic relationship with Daniel. He was constantly hitting on other girls, which would lead to massive arguments. But even though she was tough, she was also sensitive, and would become close friends with the former target of her anger, Lindsay. Seth Rogen said that Busy was a lot like Kim on set. She was intimidating, loud, and could punch you if you pissed her off. Speaking of Seth Rogen, he would land the job of portraying freak Ken Miller. Ken was quiet and angry, but had a sarcastic sense of humor and a sharp wit. Seth Rogen says that at the time, he had just recently moved to LA and was quite angry after his love life had stalled. But Judd and Paul found him incredibly funny and would model the character's sense of humor after that of Rogen's. It's weird because this was the first time that I ever felt that Seth Rogen was actually acting. Listen, I love his movies, but Rogen always just plays himself in anything that he's in. The word range is not something that I would use to describe him as an actor. So seeing him play such a different role was weird, but very interesting. Yet ironically, this turned out not to be the case. It was yet another character based on himself. It's just that back then, he was a very different person. The last member of the Freaks would be Nick Andopoulos, the group's most awkward and goofy member, as played by Jason Segel. Initially, Jason auditioned for the role of Daniel, but Apatow and Feig realized that he wasn't right for that part. So they took aspects of what Daniel was envisioned to be and used them to create a new character. As I stated before, Nick was an awkward goofball who smoked pot and played drums in his basement. He was clueless and didn't pick up on his habit of smothering his girlfriends. However, he had a big heart and would always try to keep the group from imploding. Judd Apatow said that he loved writing for Segel. In a Vanity Fair article, he said, quote, "I loved writing for Jason. That's what I felt like in high school. I felt goofy and ambitious and not sure if I had any talent. And I would be in love with these women and didn't actually know if they liked me that much. I'd never know if I was being charming or a stalker." Jason really captured that desperation I felt when I was younger. Once casting was finished, the writers were brought onto the show, and Paul Feig created a questionnaire that he gave to them. It would have questions like, what was your most embarrassing moment in high school? What was your first girlfriend like? And what was your worst drug experience? They also locked themselves in a room for the weekend and shared their personal stories from high school, which would subsequently be used in episodes. One of the most memorable was when Sam made the mistake of wearing a tacky jumpsuit to school, something which happened to Paul Feig when he was younger. Another rule that Paul and Judd had put into place was that Linda and Busy could not lose weight. They told them that they wanted people on this show to look authentic. The goal was for the audience to see them as teenagers and not anorexic models or pop stars. They also ensured that the show was shot without any fancy camera moves or elaborate lighting. The edict was that everything had to be as bare bones as possible, with nothing to distract from the storytelling. And so Freaks and Geeks would be unlike anything else on TV at the time. The stories felt real, sometimes a bit too real. I found myself almost triggered while rewatching this show. A lot of the things that the characters went through were raw, and they did not receive the happy endings that were common on other shows. The series depicted the messy nature of life. It was anti-establishment, and shattered the fairy tale expectations that viewers had of high school shows at the time. Some memorable examples were that teachers were quite indifferent at this high school, and wrote off some kids as lost causes. The common trope of having the time of your life whenever you threw a party while your parents were away was portrayed way more realistically. Throwing a massive party was not as rewarding as you thought it would be. It could lead to heartache and a whole bunch of anxiety. and probably the ugliest fact that many of us face growing up, that sometimes your dreams may never come true, no matter how much you work for it. But it also had some moments that could really surprise you. One example being in an episode called Test and Breast. In this episode, Sam is embarrassed by the gym teacher, Coach Fredericks, who is teaching sex ed. To learn more, Sam and the Geeks get their hands on an adult film, thinking that the movie would give them a better understanding of sex. Instead, it just leaves them traumatized. But when Sam breaks down and tells Fredericks about the confusion that he feels, instead of mocking the kid, Coach Fredericks does the complete opposite. He takes Sam aside and has an honest conversation with him about how it really works. And it leaves Sam feeling confident that he has a better understanding of sex. One of my particularly favorite episodes was I'm with the Band. In it, it's revealed that Nick and the rest of the freaks has a band. They mostly goof off, except for Nick, who has a dream of becoming a legitimate drummer. His father tells him that it's a pipe dream and is pressuring him to join the army. Lindsay tells him that he needs to go after his dream and takes him to an audition for a local band that he likes. In most TV shows, this is when he gets hired on the spot, or at least told that he has what it takes to follow his dream. Instead, Nick fails horribly and realizes that his dream will never come true. It was truly heartbreaking, because this indeed can sometimes be a sad reality of life. Fun fact though, Jason Segel said the fear that Nick had for his father was easy to portray because he felt intimidated by the actor who played him, Kevin Teague. Don't worry, Jason, as long as you stay away from any windows, you'll be fine.
What's her number?
However, before the show would even air, its fate would be decided. The first red flag was when a new president of NBC, Garth Ancier, was hired.
Did you ever find Bugs Bunny attractive when he'd put on a dress and play a girl bunny?
Who hated this show. He told the other executives that he didn't understand public schools because he had attended boarding school as a teenager. The next red flag came when Ancier said to them that he wanted the characters to, quote, get more wins. He said that the show was a downer and needed more happy endings, which went entirely against the core message of the show. In other words, they didn't stand a chance. So the show was scheduled for the worst time slot for a series like Freaks and Geeks could be put. Saturdays at 8 p.m., a day of the week when the show's target audience had better things to do than watch TV. Not only that, but they were put up against the worst show possible, Cops. If that weren't bad enough, the show would be aired sporadically. Sometimes it wouldn't air for 2 weeks, and other times it would be gone for 2 months. Even when Cops was moved from that time slot, it didn't help, because then they replaced it with the massively popular game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Then came the nail in the coffin when they created a website and NBC refused to promote it because they did not want people to use the internet. They told them that they would lose viewers to the World Wide Web. So sadly, the final episode of Freaks and Geeks, Discos and Dragons, would air on July 8, 2000. In the end, Daniel would join the Geeks to play a game of D&D and give them the hope that high school may not suck so much after all. Then we'd be left with the bittersweet moment of Lindsay and Kim sneaking off to attend a Grateful Dead concert for the summer. In the years that followed its cancellation, the series would be rediscovered and people would see how ahead of its time it truly was. The show's fan base loves it dearly, and so do the people who worked on it. Judd Apatow has stated that whenever possible, he will utilize actors from the series, which is his little way of continuing the show. Over the years, people have asked Paul Feig about returning to the world of Freaks and Geeks with a reunion. Paul would say in an August 2024 interview with Unilad, quote, "If I had a story, if some great idea came into my head, yeah, fine, but because also the actors are still young. It is always sad when you do a reunion and they are all old, but they are all in their prime, so you never know." But in an interview with Josh Horowitz the next year in May 2025, Paul would say,
so many people go like, "Oh, I just wish I knew how it ended." I'm like, the only show that ever had a perfect ending was 6 Feet Under. Because the last episode, they killed everybody. You saw how everybody died, so you're kind of like, okay, yes, once I know how everybody dies, then the story is over. But, characters go on, their lives change and all that. And sometimes, like, I don't want to know what happened to some of the people I went to school with because I like them because they weren't my friends necessarily, just people kind of, we're all background extras in other people's movies.
Right.
And some people take great joy in going to their, class reunion and seeing who lost their hair and who got overweight. And I don't want to know that. I just want to remember them the way that they were. And if somebody reaches out and says hi, then that's great. But
So that puts to rest the idea of a reunion, as well as, the stuff with James Franco. And I personally agree with Feig. Why risk ruining it? Just leave it alone. Our memories of how great it was and why we fell in love with it is more than enough. Many TV shows have come and gone in an attempt to emulate Freaks and Geeks. The series proved to be revolutionary. It just happens to be a shame that no one saw its brilliance at the time. If you have never seen the show for yourself and are curious, you can watch the entire series on Prime Video. So why not cut class and hang out with the outcasts who were often ignored or made fun of in your high school days? Because what you find may surprise you, or just make you laugh. I'm Jesse Shade speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for the JoBlo YouTube network. And thanks again for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Originals channel. Tell all your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We are an independent company that appreciates all of your support. And we will see you next time on the next episode of Gone, But Not Forgotten.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo remains an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.